My name is Joyce Page. I was 26 years old when I learned just how temporary my place in my own family really was. 3 months ago, my younger sister Jessica announced she was getting divorced. Not separated, not working through things, divorced. She and her husband Mark had barely been married 8 months when everything imploded. The reason, though you wouldn't hear it told this way in my parents' house, was that Jessica had been having an affair with her personal trainer, Derek. Mark discovered the messages, the photos, the lies stacked neatly like receipts no one could argue with. End of story. Except not in my family. Because in our house, Jessica had never been the problem. She was the narrative, and the narrative always bent itself to protect her. By the time she arrived at our parents' place with 3 oversized suitcases, a yoga mat, and tears that appeared on cue whenever Mom walked into the room, the story had already been rewritten. Mark was emotionally unavailable. Mark didn't support her healing journey. Mark didn't understand her growth. My parents, David and Linda Page, absorbed every word like scripture. Poor Jessica, our fragile girl, our wounded angel. Never mind that Mark had paid for her gym membership, covered her certification courses, and funded every self-discovery phase she'd cycled through that year. Never mind that he'd defended her relentlessly while she cheated on him. Facts never survived contact with Jessica's feelings. I'd been living in the family home for nearly a year by then, not because I failed to launch, but because I stepped up. Dad's construction business had taken a hit during the pandemic, and I moved back to help with the mortgage. I paid $1,500 a month in rent, plus groceries, utilities, and whatever invisible labor keeps a household running smoothly without applause. I cooked, I cleaned, I listened. I absorbed tension so others didn't have to. It was supposed to be temporary, just until I saved enough for my own place. Then Jessica's marriage collapsed, and suddenly I was the inconvenience. "Joyce, sweetheart," Mom said one afternoon, her voice already shaped around a decision that had been made without me. "Jessica needs to come home for a while." I looked up from my laptop where I was finalizing a client design deadline. "Okay," I said calmly. "The guest room is open." She hesitated. That pause, that tiny, loaded delay, was when my stomach dropped. "Well," she said carefully, "Jessica has so much stuff, and the guest room is small. She's really fragile right now. She needs privacy to heal." I stared at her. "Are you asking me to give up my room?" "It's only temporary," Dad added quickly from behind his newspaper. "Just a few weeks." A few weeks became a month became 2. Jessica took over my room like a hostile acquisition. My houseplants were tossed because they triggered her allergies. My furniture was rearranged without asking. My queen bed was suddenly bad for her back. She suggested, casually, confidently, that I store my art supplies in the garage because they made the room feel cluttered. Meanwhile, I was shoved into the 8x10 guest room with a twin bed and no desk, trying to run a freelance graphic design career from the corner of the dining table when Jessica wasn't using it for vision boards, manifestation journals, and healing crystals. When I tried working late, she'd wander in and sigh dramatically, saying she really needed the space for her energy alignment. The breaking point didn't come with a fight. It came with laughter. Late one night, I passed my old room and heard Jessica on the phone. "I swear, Madison, it was so easy," she said, laughing. "They didn't even question it. Joyce just rolled over like she always does." Another laugh, sharper this time. "She should be grateful. Honestly, maybe this will finally push her to move out and stop being such a burden." I stood frozen in the hallway, my hand gripping the wall. That word, burden, landed heavier than everything else. Not because it was new, but because it was finally said out loud. That night, I didn't confront her. I didn't cry in front of anyone. I didn't plead to be seen. I opened my laptop, and I made a decision that would quietly unravel everything they thought they knew. The night I decided to leave, I didn't pack a single box. I just sat there in the guest room, my temporary room, listening to the muffled sounds of my family moving freely through the house like I didn't exist. Jessica's laugh floated down the hallway. Mom's voice followed, soft and indulgent. Dad's chair creaked as he settled in to watch television. Life went on, without me. I opened my laptop and typed one word into the search bar: apartments. At first, I told myself I was just looking. Window shopping. Giving myself something hopeful to stare at while my world shrank to an 8x10 room with peeling wallpaper and a door that never quite shut right. But the listings pulled me in. Studios, one-bedrooms, converted lofts, places with hardwood floors and tall windows and actual doors that locked. Places where no one could tell me to move my life into the garage. I didn't tell anyone I was looking. Not my parents, not Jessica, not even friends. Something in me needed this to be quiet, observational, controlled. Within 2 weeks, I found it. A one-bedroom in a renovated historic building downtown. Exposed brick. Huge windows. Enough space for a proper work area. My space. The rent was $2,000, $500 more than I'd been paying my parents, but I'd just landed a new long-term contract with a marketing firm that more than covered the difference. I signed the lease the same day, and that's when the experiment began. I didn't announce my move. I didn't make a scene. I just started disappearing. Every morning, I packed a backpack like I always did and left for work. Only now, instead of heading to a coffee shop or client meeting, I drove downtown. I carried boxes up the back stairs of my new building, little by little. Clothes first, shoes, art supplies, my computer, important documents. I left just enough behind to sell the illusion. A few outfits in the closet, toiletries in the bathroom, my bed neatly made every morning. The guest room was perfect for this kind of vanishing act, tucked at the end of the hall. Forgotten. No one ever went in there unless they needed extra storage, and even then, they asked me to move things. I kept up appearances carefully. I responded to family group texts. I showed up for Sunday dinners. I kept my automatic rent payments running so no one would question the missing income. I even left dirty dishes in the sink every now and then, evidence of a presence no one actually verified. Ironically, it was easier than living there had ever been. Without Jessica's constant entitlement humming in the background, my nervous system finally exhaled. I slept through the night. I worked uninterrupted. I cooked meals without someone criticizing my food choices or emotional energy. My new apartment became a sanctuary faster than I expected. I set up my workspace by the windows. Natural light spilled across my desk like permission. I unpacked my art supplies and arranged them carefully, no longer worried about someone calling them clutter. I hung the few paintings I'd been too self-conscious to display at my parents' house. 2 weeks in, I adopted a calico cat from the local shelter. I named her Luna. Jessica was allergic to everything, remember? Except attention. Luna slept on my chest the first night like she'd always belonged there. Meanwhile, my family carried on. Through brief visits and social media, I watched Jessica continue her performance. Inspirational quotes about resilience, photos of smoothies, gym selfies, spa days. My parents paid for her therapy, her memberships, her self-care shopping sprees. I paid for groceries I barely ate when I stopped by. The double life started to weigh on me, not because it was difficult, but because of what it revealed. No one noticed. Not once did my parents ask why they never heard me moving around in the mornings. No one questioned why my groceries stayed untouched. No one wondered why I was always working late. I could have vanished completely, and they wouldn't have seen the difference. I started documenting everything. At first, it was just notes in my phone. Dates, comments, moments. Day 12. Stopped by for mail. Jessica, using my old room as her personal closet. Clothes everywhere. Day 18. Sunday dinner. Dad says mortgage is tight. Jessica suggests cutting unnecessary expenses. When Mom mentions my rent, Jessica laughs and says maybe they should adjust it since I barely use any space anyway. They all laughed. I excused myself to the bathroom and cried for 10 minutes. The most painful part wasn't the favoritism anymore. It was the realization that I was useful, but not missed. They missed my money, my help, my emotional labor. They didn't miss me. That understanding hardened something in my chest, and it clarified my next move. Because if I was already invisible, then I could choose how I disappeared. And when I came back into focus, it would be on my terms. By the third week of my quiet disappearance, I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. I showed up to Sunday dinners the same way I always had, dessert in hand, polite smile fixed in place, shoulders squared as if nothing inside me was unraveling. I parked a few blocks away now, walking the rest of the distance like a visitor instead of a resident. No one noticed. The house smelled the same. Garlic, lemon cleaner, comfort that had never quite belonged to me. Jessica held court at the dining table like a queen returning from exile. Every conversation bent toward her orbit, her trauma, her growth, her setbacks, her bravery for surviving a marriage she herself had detonated. "I'm just really proud of how strong you've been," Mom said one night, reaching across the table to squeeze Jessica's hand. Jessica sighed, eyes shimmering. "It hasn't been easy." Dad nodded solemnly. "You've handled it with grace." I swallowed a laugh so sharp it would have cut my tongue. That same week, I had finalized the biggest contract of my career, a 6-month creative deal with Patterson Creative, large enough that I'd finally quit taking rushed, underpaid gigs just to stay afloat. When I mentioned it, Dad glanced up briefly. "That's nice, Joyce," he said, already turning back to Jessica. "Did you hear back from the boutique about your shifts?" Jessica beamed. "They want me 2 days a week." Mom gasped. "Oh, honey, that's wonderful." It felt like being erased in real time. The invisibility extended beyond conversation. One night, I conducted a small experiment. I rearranged the guest room completely, moved the bed, changed the bedding, stacked boxes in places they'd never been before. I left it like that for 5 days. No one noticed. Not once. I could have painted the walls neon green and hung disco balls from the ceiling. As long as I showed up smiling for Sunday dinner, I might as well not have existed. The real fracture came during week 4. I stopped by the house mid-afternoon to grab art supplies I'd forgotten. I thought no one was home. I was wrong. I paused in the hallway when I heard my parents' voices drifting from the kitchen. "We really need to think about raising Joyce's rent," Dad said. I froze. With Jessica's expenses and the repairs coming up, we could use the extra income. "How much?" Mom asked. "Maybe bump it to $2,000, he said casually. "She's hardly ever here anyway. Always working on those art projects. It's not like she has other options at her age." Mom hummed in agreement. She should be grateful. Most people pay way more. I stood there, heart pounding, as they discussed increasing the rent for a room I hadn't slept in for over a month. For a life they assumed I had no alternative to. That night, something shifted from sadness to strategy. I bought a small digital recorder the next day. Pennsylvania is a one-party consent state. I started recording, not out of revenge, but clarity. Jessica on the phone, laughing about how she'd won. My parents dismissing my work as a hobby. Casual remarks about how dependable I was, how little I needed, how easy I made things. The evidence piled up quickly. The most damning moment came when I overheard Jessica in my old room, her room now, talking to Derek. "I can't believe how easy this was," she said, sprawled across my old bed. "Joyce is such a pushover. Mom and Dad are desperate to help their precious baby girl." Derek laughed. "What about your sister?" Jessica scoffed. "She's pathetic. This house is way too nice for someone like her. I'm basically teaching her independence." I recorded every word. That was the moment I stopped feeling guilty. Because guilt only exists when there's mutual care. And there wasn't. I wasn't invisible by accident. I was invisible because it was convenient. So I started planning the reveal. Carefully, publicly, with witnesses. If they were going to see me, they were going to see everything. Sunday dinner was loud that night. Not chaotic. Performative. The kind of loud that exists for an audience, even when no one admits there is one. Jessica had invited her friend Madison, who now showed up regularly, phone always half raised, documenting moments that could be edited into something inspirational later. I arrived right on time, carrying a box of pastries and wearing the calmest expression I could manage. Jessica was already mid-monologue. "And honestly, I don't know how I would have survived without my parents," she said, voice trembling in a way that sounded rehearsed. "They've just been so supportive while I rebuild my life." Mom reached over and squeezed her arm. "We'll always be here for you." Dad nodded. "Whatever you need." Madison snapped a photo. I sat down, folded my napkin onto my lap, and listened. They talked about Jessica's therapy, her gym schedule, her shopping trip earlier that week that Mom had surprised her with because healing was expensive after all. When the plates were being cleared, Mom laughed lightly. "Well, the good news is Jessica will only be here a little while longer," she said, "just until she's fully back on her feet." Jessica laughed too. "Yeah, and then Joyce can have her precious guest room back and stop being so grumpy about it." The table erupted in chuckles, like I was the unreasonable one. Like being displaced from my own room for 2 months with no end date was some charming family anecdote. That was my opening. I stood up slowly. Smiled. "How funny," I said. "I haven't lived here in 6 weeks." The laughter died instantly. Silence slammed down on the table so hard I could hear the hum of the refrigerator. Mom blinked. "What do you mean?" "I moved out," I said calmly. 6 weeks ago." Jessica's smile froze. "That's not funny." "I'm not joking." I pulled out my phone and passed it around. Photos of my apartment, the sunlight, my art studio. Luna curled up on my desk like she owned the place. "This is where I live now," I continued. "Downtown, 1 bedroom, and yes, Luna lives with me." Dad stared. "Luna?" "My cat," I said. "The one I could never have here because Jessica is allergic to everything." Jessica shot to her feet. "You moved out without telling us? That's selfish. What if we needed you?" I laughed. actually laughed. Needed me for what, Jessica? I asked. You took my room. You mocked my work. You laughed about pushing me out. What exactly did you need me for? She opened her mouth, then closed it. I tapped my phone and played the recording. Her voice filled the dining room. Joyce is such a pushover. This house is way too nice for someone like her. I'm teaching her independence. Madison's face drained of color. Dad stared at Jessica like he was seeing her for the first time. Mom's expression fractured into something panicked and ashamed. Why didn't you tell us you were leaving? Mom whispered. Because I wanted to see how long it would take you to notice, I said. The answer was 6 weeks. Jessica scoffed. You're blowing this way out of proportion. I was going through a divorce. You were going through a divorce because you cheated, I said evenly. And instead of facing consequences, you turned me into collateral damage. That's not fair, she snapped. Mark was emotionally absent. I swiped again. Photos of her out partying. Spa days. Derek's arm around her waist. This is healing, I asked. Madison stood up. I should go. No, I said softly. You should stay. You helped her build this narrative. You should see what happens when it collapses. I turned back to my parents. I paid $1,500 a month to live here, I said. Even after I moved out, I kept paying so you wouldn't notice. You were planning to raise my rent to $2,000 for a room I hadn't slept in for weeks. Dad's face went pale. Mom started crying. Jessica exploded. You're just jealous because Mom and Dad love me more. The words hung there. Toxic, undeniable. I nodded slowly. There it is. I grabbed my purse. I don't need you to love me more, I said quietly. I just needed you to see me. I walked out, and I didn't look back. My phone started vibrating before I even reached my car. I ignored it. I drove home, my home, through familiar streets that suddenly felt lighter, like I'd finally dropped something heavy I didn't realize I'd been carrying my entire life. Luna greeted me at the door with an indignant meow, weaving around my ankles, as if demanding an explanation for my absence. I know, I told her softly. It was a lot. That night, I ordered Chinese takeout, poured a glass of wine, and opened my sketchbook for the first time in weeks without feeling guilty for choosing myself. My phone stayed face down on the counter, buzzing intermittently like a dying insect. I didn't answer a single message. The next morning, I woke to chaos. Texts from Mom swung wildly between guilt and anger. Why would you do this to us? We were just trying to help Jessica. Please come home so we can talk like a family. Dad's messages were more practical. We need to discuss the finances. You can't just disappear when the mortgage is tight. Let's figure out a new arrangement. Jessica's texts were pure venom. You're manipulative. You ambushed me. You're cruel for humiliating me in front of Madison. I blocked her. Mom showed up at my apartment 2 days later. She stood in the hallway, clutching her purse like a shield, eyes darting around as if she couldn't reconcile this space with the daughter she thought she knew. Joyce, honey, we need to talk. Do we? I asked, not stepping aside. This has gotten out of hand, she said. Jessica is devastated. She's devastated her manipulation was exposed, I replied calmly. That's not the same thing. Mom's face crumpled. She's young. She made a mistake. She's 24, I said. I'm 26. Stop treating her like a child and me like I'm disposable. That word landed harder than I expected. Disposable. I finally let her in. She sat on my couch, looking around in quiet shock at the artwork on the walls, the clean lines, the peace. What's my favorite color? I asked suddenly. She blinked. Blue? It's green, I said gently. What kind of art do I do? She hesitated. Graphic design? Mixed media and digital illustration, I said. What's my middle name? Silence. It's Elizabeth, I said. You chose it. Then I asked about Jessica. Mom answered everything immediately. When she started crying, I didn't feel triumphant, just tired. I didn't realize, she whispered. You didn't want to, I replied. 2 weeks later, the real test came. Jessica's boyfriend, Derek, broke up with her. Apparently, living with your parents after cheating on your husband wasn't the vibe he was looking for. At 2 a.m., I got a group text. Joyce, Jessica really needs us. Can you come over? She needs the guest room again, just temporarily. I screenshotted it and sent it to my group chat with my artist friends. 6 months later, still asking for the guest room. Then I turned off my phone. When I turned my phone back on the next morning, I already knew what I'd find. Missed calls, voicemails heavy with accusation disguised as concern, texts telling me I was cold, unforgiving, dramatic, that I was abandoning my family when they needed me most. I read them once, then I set the phone down and made coffee. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to explain myself. I sent one message to the family group chat. Jessica is an adult who created this situation through her own choices. I will not be coming over, lending money, or providing emotional support for problems she refuses to take responsibility for. That was it. The backlash was immediate. Dad accused me of being vindictive. Mom said I was holding grudges. Jessica, using a new number, called me heartless. I didn't respond, and something unexpected happened. Without me there to absorb the tension, the family dynamic shifted. Slowly, uncomfortably, inevitably. Dad started asking Jessica real questions. About money, about work, about her plans. Questions he used to avoid because I made things easy. Mom began noticing patterns. How every crisis somehow centered Jessica. How responsibility always landed elsewhere. How silence filled the space I used to occupy. And for the first time, they reached out to me. Not for help, but curiosity. "How's your work going?" Mom asked one evening, tentative. "What are you painting lately?" Dad asked another time. 6 months later, I had my first solo art show. A small gallery, white walls, warm lights, my name printed cleanly on the invitation. Joyce Page, Becoming Visible. I sent my family an invite without expectations. They came, all of them. Jessica stood in front of one painting longer than the others, a mixed media piece of a woman fading into the background, then stepping forward, finally seen. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "No audience, no performance. I was selfish. I convinced myself you didn't need support, so I wouldn't have to give any." I searched her face. "I'm in real therapy now," she added, "and I'm moving into my own apartment next month. 2 jobs, no excuses." I nodded. "I hope you keep going." My parents bought that painting. "We want a reminder," Mom said, voice thick, "of what we almost lost." A year has passed. Jessica lives independently now. Single, working, learning. My parents respect my boundaries, and my life, and me? I'm still in my apartment, with Luna asleep on my desk while I work on pieces that sell in galleries across the state. I'm dating a wonderful man named Kevin, someone who met me after I became visible and loves me for who I am, not what I provide. Sometimes I think about that dinner, about the moment I stood up and shattered their comfortable lies. It was terrifying, and it was necessary, because sometimes the only way to be seen is to disappear first.